Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Chapman Henderson. I'm the president and CEO of the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes, also known as FLASH. I'm very excited to welcome you to this webinar entitled, What Do We Mean by Wildfire Resilience? Reimagining an End to the Disaster and a Beginning and Start to a Sustainable Future. We last gathered this esteemed panel of experts during the National Disaster Resilience Conference in 2024 during November. And our theme was Resilience Reimagined. This panel and these speakers filled that theme to such a degree that the panel was one of our most popular of that gathering. So in light of the recent events in Southern California, and now even South Carolina, we have come back together to present it to you anew. Speaking of NDRC, I would like to invite everyone to either submit for a presentation or plan to join us at NDRC 2025 also in November this year in beautiful Clearwater Beach, Florida. I also want to thank NFPA for making it possible by co-hosting and handling all of our logistics for this, as well as all of the technicalities and gathering us all together. Thank you for your leadership on this topic as an enduring matter, and also for making the panel presentation possible today. Before I introduce our first presenter, I want to just make a quick reminder of the antitrust statement for those of you from common industries, specifically insurance. Antitrust statement is to inform meeting participants that whenever competitors within any industry gather, appropriate care must be taken to ensure that violation of antitrust laws do not take place. To avoid antitrust allegations, it is necessary to avoid discussions of sensitive topics. These would include agreements to engage in product boycotts, restrictive market allocations, refusal to deal with third parties, and price restraining activities are all automatically illegal under antitrust laws. We mention this just as a cautionary reminder, although we have no concerns that this presentation in the past or today will venture into those areas. So now I'd like to share a brief introduction for the first of our four esteemed panelists today in order. First, we will have Juliana Anastasatos, who is from Verisk. She is the Senior Director in Wildfire. Her presentation will focus and provide insight into the impact of the wildfire peril on the insurance industry. Juliana, as I mentioned, is the Senior Director of Wildfire with Verisk Underwriting Solutions. They created her position in recognition of the unique challenges facing carriers operating in high wildfire risk states and the need for effective tools to confidently assess the wildfire risk. She works from her home in Reno, Nevada, and is responsible for Verisk wildfire business strategy, supporting the team in extreme event solutions that develop and manage the wildfire model for the United States, as well as the underwriting solutions team that develop and support Fireline. Also in her role, she serves as a public-facing spokesperson, educating stakeholders, regulators, and policymakers about Verisk wildfire risk assessment solutions. Please join me in welcoming Juliana.
Thank you, Leslie. So let's start with this. You really don't have to look much further than the evening news or your email inbox headlines that are really highlighting a focus on the growing concern about the increasing wildfire disasters and the resulting losses that are straining the insurance market. Now, these headlines are primarily from California, and we know that California's insurance market has its own set of challenges, even apart from the wildfire risk. But it's not just California where we're seeing the impact of this peril on the insured losses and consequently on the insurance market. And so as we start this discussion today, I just want to posit that the future of wildfire resilience, it's not only about the physical resilience that we're going to hear about from Anne and from Michelle and Kimmy, but it's also about financial resilience. And this is where the insurance market comes in. The private insurance market, it touches practically every aspect of our lives, from buying or renting a home or an apartment to starting and running a business. And it's absolutely critical to a sustainable and stable insurance market that insurance carriers are comfortable and confident with understanding and assessing the risk from a peril like wildfire, and perhaps more importantly, with feeling some assurance that the risks aren't going to continue increasing. And so this is how they can make informed decisions about which risks to accept, how to appropriately price them, ultimately, so they remain solvent and available to meet the customer's needs if and when a disaster strikes. And so let's take a look at a map to get an idea, or actually these are first some numbers that I want to look at about the impact of the magnitude of this peril and the losses. These numbers come from Verisk's Property Claims Solutions. And as you can see here, in the entire decade of the 1980s, we saw only a little over 100 million in insured losses. And even adjusted for inflation, these numbers get nowhere near what we're seeing more recently. By the 2000s, we saw that the insured losses from the wildfire peril reached about $3.6 billion. And then from the 2000s to the 2010s, you can see there that there's a nearly tenfold increase in insured losses. Now in the 2020s, we're only halfway through the decade, and we're seeing that those losses are again nearly doubled, especially after accounting for the losses from the tragic LA fires that happened earlier this year. And so why are these losses so precipitously increasing? Well, it's because we really didn't see this kind of loss until about the last decade, where we're seeing that wildfire disasters are destroying hundreds or thousands of homes at a time. And so this has been a very eye-opening, precipitous increase that's unquestionably changed the landscape of the insurance industry, especially in these Western states. So now I want to take a look at this map that we've created on the next slide. This is what insurance carriers are having to contend with. This is a view of the wildfire risk that we created using our Fireline tool, where it's available in these 14 states. It's an address level risk assessment tool that provides a relative view of the risk that a structure will be damaged or destroyed in a wildfire event. And as you can see, there's a fair amount of red. It indicates a lot of high and extreme wildfire risk. Now on the next slide, we're going to look at a table that really shows you the total number of structures in the state, juxtaposed against the total number that are located in high to extreme wildfire risk areas. At the top of the list, you can see California. That's because it has really the most number of structures and also the highest number of structures in the extreme. But as a percentage, which is what I want to show you next, you can see that it's, not to minimize what we're seeing in California, there's nearly 2 million structures located in high risk areas. But on a percentage basis, it's pretty shocking to see that 25% of structures in Tennessee are located in high extreme wildfire areas. Down below, you can see Idaho and Montana have pretty high percentages too. Over 11% of the structures in all of the state are located in high to extreme fire risk areas. Now, despite this sort of grim news, what we hear uniformly is that insurance carriers, they want to be able to provide insurance coverage for their customers that are living in these areas. They don't want to retreat completely, but they need to understand the impact of the risk to their book of business. They need some confidence that the risk won't simply continue to increase, making it possible for them to continue insuring these properties. And there's no question that the losses from the recent wildfire disasters, coupled with our understanding of the extent of wildfire risk, has been at least partially responsible for insurance companies in these states having to make some really difficult decisions from an underwriting and pricing standpoint in order to make sure that they're viable to pay the claims when these disasters strike. Interestingly, from a homeowner's perspective, we've heard a lot of them say that they're really less concerned about their house burning down, shockingly, than they are about whether they can get an insurance policy and find a company to cover them at a rate that they can actually afford. So what you're going to hear about today is that these homes and neighborhoods, they don't have to be uninsurably risky. Recognizing the challenges, some very prominent fire chiefs in California, they posited this. We cannot suppress, regulate, or market price our way out of the wildfire crisis. We must mitigate. And so insurance carriers and other stakeholders like Verisk continue to partner with organizations like the National Fire Protection Association and the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, investing in resilience initiatives to better understand the impacts of these mitigation strategies that we're going to hear about today that can bend down the wildfire risk. And for the insurance industry, the expectation is that these mitigations will make homes more insurable. And this is where insurance models can play a role. They're invaluable to helping carriers get a full picture of the risk, understanding how undertaking these mitigation efforts can impact the risk and measurably reduce it, which ultimately gives carriers more confidence and comfort, making the insurance market more sustainable for the future and a sustainable, resilient insurance market future.
So our next speaker is also our co-host today, and she is Michelle Steinberg, and her role is Wildfire Division Director for the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA. Since 2002, Michelle has guided the development and growth of FireWise USA, the recognition program at NFPA. She also manages Wildfire Community Preparedness Day campaign, and that is in May. We want to make sure everybody notes that and participates this year. She manages Outthink Wildfire policy initiative to end the destruction of communities by wildfire. She authors the wildfire column for the NFPA Journal. She has served on the Presidential Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission from 2022 to 24, developing comprehensive policy recommendations and strategies on better ways to prevent, manage, suppress, and recover from wildfires. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Appreciate the introduction. We just want to give a big picture of what is going on with the so-called wildland urban interface and homes at risk. Today, we have more than 44 million homes located in wildfire risk areas. As Juliana pointed out, many of those in high or extreme risk areas. In fact, more than 1 in 3 homes in the United States is located in a wildfire-prone area, makes this the fastest growing land use type in the country, which is outpacing all other forms of development. And as a result, more homes are in harm's way and being damaged by wildfires. The costs are rising. The problem is that risks are increasing as wildfires become more frequent, burn hotter and last longer, causing more damage and costing more money. The outcome is that more homes are damaged and more money is spent on response, recovery, and rebuilding. The vision of this team is a more resilient future when wildland fire is not a disaster. We really are looking to that because people, homes, and the community prepared ahead of time to receive, respond to, and recover from fire. There's so many different myths that have to do with this. We're going to address some of those. So some people might look at this vision statement and say, well, how can that be? How can we solve this problem? The first myth we're going to address is that people believe that wildfires are a forest problem and not an urban problem. I'm going to speak to that. The second myth that my colleague, Dr. Ann Cope, will talk about is what we hear people say, well, there's nothing you can do, right, to make your home more resilient against wildfire. And finally, Kimmy Barrett from Headwaters Economics will help us bust the myth that it costs too much to mitigate homes from wildfire. So I'll begin. And those of you who know me know I'm from Boston. We like this word wicked. When we say we've got a wicked problem, we might say in Boston it's a wicked big problem because wicked means very in Boston speak. But this wicked problem is actually a social science terminology that has come out of Australia way back in the 1960s. And some of the definitions around a wicked problem you can see on the screen that it's difficult to clearly define. There's multiple causes of wicked problems. These problems are incomplete, contradictory, and have changing requirements. These are socially complex problems with no clear solution, and even solving one aspect could reveal or create other problems. And finally, wicked problems are not the responsibility of any one single entity. And this really describes wildfire to a T in my mind. We are dealing with a problem where weather patterns have shifted in location, intensity, and duration. Globally, we're experiencing and will continue to experience extreme weather events, higher highs and lower lows. And so for the fire service coping with wildfires that threaten our communities, it means the fires that they fought at the beginning of their careers are not the same as the fires they're fighting now. Fires that we are dealing with now will be different in 20 or 30 years' time. So we really can't keep looking at the past to tell us how to cope with future scenarios. Unfortunately, the problem is getting worse. Volatile climate with extremes cause severe droughts and longer periods of hot weather that alternate with bouts of heavy precipitation that contribute to the growth of vegetation that fuels a fire. So when we go from an overabundance of rain, it'll fuel the growth of vegetation, to severe drought and extreme high temperatures, we're presented with dead and dry vegetation that contributes to fire intensity and spread. We're likely dealing with water shortages that impact our number one tool in fire suppression, and we may see more fires that reach deadly intensities faster, putting the lives of residents and responders at risk. Excuse me. These impacts are really affecting both our residents and our firefighters. It puts their lives at risk. And we really have to think about our land use management decisions. It's not just the weather and the climate, it's a growing population and construction. As I mentioned earlier, 1 in 3 homes in the US could be seen as in a wildfire exposed area. And the fact that land management of our forested lands has been oversuppressed, and the overgrowth can contribute to those larger and more intense fires. So with all this bad news, what can we control? This is the classic fire triangle. The oxygen, heat, and fuel are what is necessary for a fire to sustain and grow. We can't do anything about the oxygen or the heat, but we can control the fuel. When it comes to the problem of wildfire disasters, by that I mean hundreds or thousands of structures burning simultaneously. Fuel is not just the plants and the trees, it's our homes and our businesses, and mostly, unfortunately, it's our homes. So when it comes to structures as fuel for wildfires, it is our homes. A recent analysis of HUD and census data shows that 94% of our existing building stock in the U.S. are residential structures. 90% of those, something like 100 million structures, are single-family homes. And almost half of those, by some estimates, that 45 million, are those wildfire-prone areas where we have these homes. So very, very few of them were originally sited, designed, or built using a standard or code to address their wildfire risk. Many of them from recent housing surveys show that vegetation is surrounding their homes, many with vegetation up close within 5 feet of the exterior walls. We're going to understand a lot more about why that's so important to address when Ann Cope speaks, but I also want to speak to how we've built and designed and why we might be seeing some of these fires. I'll use one example. Some folks may be familiar with the recent Tubbs Fire 2017 across Sonoma County, heavily impacting the city of Santa Rosa, which we see on the screen. But this fire was preceded many years ago by the Hanley Fire. The 1964 perimeter is shown on this map in red, and you can see almost the exact same perimeter of the Tubbs Fire in black. One of the things that this tells us is that where wildfires have been, they will return at some point. What's different, what's changed, you can see on the black, the little, I've circled it in green. You can see the extra little area that's poked out from the original Hanley Fire is the Tubbs Fire perimeter was Coffey Park. This was built after the Hanley Fire. This is a subdivision on flat ground, and you can see what happened to it. So in other words, we continue to put structural fuel into these areas where wildfire will happen. CAL FIRE, which is the main firefighting and forestry agency, it's the home of the state fire marshal in California, has done incredible work analyzing every major wildfire disaster by immediately getting out and determining whether structures were untouched, damaged, or destroyed. Their analysis of 8 major wildfire disasters in California starting in 2014 showed that 93% of all the structures within those fire perimeters were completely destroyed. And in those fires, between 68 to 99% of that destruction occurred within 24 hours of the fire starting. That represents more than 38,000 buildings, mostly, again, homes. And this means that fighting wildfire disasters has to start long before smoke is in the air. This data is telling us that urban conflagrations cannot be stopped with the suppression and response tactics we rely on in other kinds of events. There's simply too much fuel in the form of our combustible buildings for our firefighters to be effective saving property once those structures ignite. And again, wildfire disasters are occurring not just because of climate change impacts, but because of how and where we're choosing to use land. We've been suppressing fires in our forests traditionally. Some forests now have a century of overgrowth. In many areas, we've chosen to develop we have ignored the presence of wildfire in the natural environment, to our peril. Just like floods along riverbanks, wildfires have a natural function and a return interval, and where it has been, it will occur again. So when we build without fire in mind, it can result not only in environmental degradation and disturbance of ecological patterns, but also in whole neighborhoods where every structure is highly vulnerable to ignition. This is another element that we can and must control.
Thank you, Michelle. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who's Dr. Ann Cope. She is the Chief Engineer for the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. She's going to provide the latest information about the IBHS world-class engineering and research-powered mitigation solutions. Just a little bit of background about Ann. She leads the applied research team at IBHS, focusing on building performance in hurricanes, wildfires, severe thunderstorms, and hailstorms. The full scale is translated into guidance for insurers and building owners and informs to building codes and standards. Prior to IBHS, Dr. Cope designed projects for NASA, the Department of Defense, and commercial launch operations with RS&H. She's also a proud veteran of the United States Army and a registered professional engineer. Welcome, Ann.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Leslie. It's great to see you again. Busting the myth that there's nothing we can do. There are wonderful things that people can do, like today in your backyard, amazing things that you can do to reduce the risk of wildfire, to reduce the impacts on your home. So as my colleague, Michelle Steinberg just said, most of the damage and destruction, 93% of the structures within the perimeter, within the first 24 hours. So what that tells us is your home, your cul-de-sac, your neighborhood has to be able to stand against what Mother Nature is throwing until the fire service can catch up to what's going on with those high winds and terrible red flag conditions. The neighborhood has to stand, watch the embers go by, and then be resilient and come back. And we're uncovering the science that's going to make that possible. It is possible when we mitigate the structures. So here's some of the work we've been doing here at the laboratory at IBHS. We take full-size buildings. We build half-size structures of buildings. We light things on fire and burn them to the ground, destroying all these structures in the name of science, because we need to learn at full scale and with great messy detail exactly how the fire jumps around from one thing to another, where the nooks and crannies are, where the pieces are that are going to ignite, where are the embers going to circulate and land and catch, what pieces are most vulnerable, and how are buildings vulnerable next to each other. These are the things that we have been studying for well over a decade. We're about to celebrate our 15th anniversary here at the IBHS Research Center. But that's not the only pieces of work that have informed these mitigation tactics. There are decades before us of people going out in the wildland and learning about wildland fire, people watching what happened during structural fire. Jack Cohen, Steve Quarles, these titans of wildfire experience have informed our work that now builds upon it, and we have taken the information and consolidated it. All the decades of research that we have consolidated into a voluntary designation program. So you can think of this as beyond the building code, a voluntary designation program that incorporates all of the science we know to date. Wildfire prepared home. And you can see the information on the screen. You can also go to wildfireprepared.org and get the information for yourself so you can spread it around to your friends and go back and reference it. Wildfire Prepared, entry-level, base level, has the 3 key mitigation features. And these together, when you do all 3, you have now achieved a significant reduction in your vulnerability to embers. You need to have a Class A roof. There are some key building features, which include ember-resistant vents and 6 inches around the base of your structure that is resistant to burning material. And then very, very critical, defensible space. There's ongoing discussions right now in California about zone 0. This is what that is. You don't want something that is like a wooden fence that will wick fire to your structure right there in those first 5 feet. You saw that in some of the research videos from IBHS. The next level, moving beyond protection from embers and also including some resilience against flame and radiant heat. The longer list there that you see in Wildfire Prepared Home Plus about non-combustible siding, enclosing the eaves, upgrading to a wildfire-resistant deck, the dual pane windows and doors, covering the gutters. These are the things that you typically think of when you and your local fire chief talk about home hardening. So again, these are the additional mitigations that get you some protection from flames and radiant heat, but the embers are that base level wildfire prepared home. So wildfire prepared home is looking at your individual home. If you work for the tax appraiser's office or you're an insurer, you think of that in terms of a parcel. A parcel is simply your house and the surroundings. That's your individual house. We know that the community aspect of wildfire is also very important. So what you do on your own lot or parcel, your house, also impacts what happens for your neighbor, and likewise. If your whole cul-de-sac works together and everybody is getting that ember protection from wildfire prepared home, wow, you have really achieved a lot more than just one person doing it. Likewise, if your entire neighborhood is just connecting junipers everywhere, your one wildfire prepared home is not going to be as effective because of the things that you have around you. So it's important for every individual homeowner within those red areas that Juliana showed earlier, get the pieces and parts of wildfire prepared home and talk to your neighbors. That's why FireWise is so important and wildfire prepared home is so important. We know these pieces matter because we've gone out and looked at the LA fires just recently, Lahaina, Marshall, Camp. Each time we have a fire where there is a significant suburban conflagration, we have some key factors. First and foremost, density of structures is absolutely there. So looking at all conflagrations, you have things where there are high winds, there is a drought, either a flash drought or a prolonged drought, and then you have structures densely together. Those 3 things are common in every single conflagration that we've studied. Here in Lahaina, we did a deeper dive to say, okay, what are the top variables that said where was the fire going to stop and what buildings were able to survive? The key features are the density first, then the connective fuels between the buildings, and then the materials that the buildings themselves were made out of. Just goes to show, wildfire prepared home, very important for that single home, and the community aspect really matters. Here's a graphic that shows why. When fire is happening in the wild land, it is lofting embers that come into the neighborhood. Those can travel for miles. Once you have a building that's on fire within the community, now you've changed the game. The embers and the radiant heat that come off of that building are severe, and they can greatly impact the rest of the neighborhood. So as we think about how do we design neighborhoods to withstand that onslaught of the embers and the radiant heat, we pull together the pieces and parts of Wildfire Prepared Home, and you will see us launch later this month, March of 2025, you'll see us launch Wildfire Prepared Neighborhood. Again, taking the science to the street. For more information about the studies that we have done for Lahaina, you can follow this QR code. You can go to our website and get a deeper dive on these pieces of information. Since the time of the NDRC, we've also now done a deeper dive on the fires that occurred in LA. You can find that information at our website as well. The science is real. These are myth-busting pieces, and there are fantastic things you can do today. Your roof, your vents, and that 5 feet around your house are going to make a big difference. And get Firewise and get your whole community on board. It is possible. And now I want to hand it back to Leslie, who's going to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Anne. It is my pleasure to introduce our fourth and final presenter ahead of our live chat. She is Dr. Kimmy Barrett, Senior Wildfire Research and Policy Analyst for Headwaters Economics. She's going to share study insights on the real costs of wildfire mitigation. And I think what you're going to find is that there's some good news inside the study that they have done. Dr. Barrett is a senior wildlife research, as I said, and policy analyst at Headwaters, which is a nonpartisan independent research organization based in Bozeman, Montana. She is a committed agent of change in how we live with inevitable wildfires and partnering with institutions, community organizations, leaders, local government, federal policymakers, and other subject matter experts. Kimmy has led research of national significance on topical issues such as the economics of wildfires, structural ignition vulnerabilities, building codes and land use planning, and community risk reduction strategies. She has served on the Federal Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission, providing key congressional policy recommendations to better address wildfire impacts. Please join me in welcoming Kimmy Barrett.
Thank you so much for that, Leslie. Yes, my name is Kimmy, and I do work for Headwaters Economics, where I spend a great deal of time looking at the economics and the costs and the impacts of increasing wildfire risk, specific to what we reference as the built environment. And that's what I'll be talking about today, and the final myth that we are going to be busting in this presentation. And that it really is this assumption that the cost of risk reduction to homes and neighborhoods and these mitigation measures to, again, what we reference as the built environment are prohibitively expensive. But to first really unravel this myth, we have to have a better understanding of the numbers and the baseline figures we are already looking at given this current trajectory of increasing risk and trends. So let's start looking at these numbers. What do we have? Well, how about 105,000 structures? That's the number of structures and homes that have been destroyed or damaged by wildfire since 2005. We know that every year this rate is increasing, and it unfortunately doesn't account for the nearly 17,000 structures that were lost in the recent LA fires. And while almost 2/3 or 100,000 of these structures have been located in the state of California, do not be deceived. Other states such as Oklahoma, Tennessee, Florida, New Jersey, even Louisiana are experiencing increasing catastrophic wildfire risk. In response, we spend a lot of money protecting homes. And this is what we call suppression, or the amount of money spent containing and extinguishing a fire upon initial attack. And right now that averages about $65.1 million per wildfire, doubling the cost that we were spending in 1999. And yet we know suppression alone will not address the scale of the increasing wildfire crisis. Urban conflagrations are on the rise, and so are the costs for recovery and rebuilding. And you heard my colleague Juliana speak about this early on, but in short, the insurance claims are increasing as a result as well. And in fact, insured losses from wildfires have doubled as a proportion of total catastrophe claims. Today, wildfires are the fastest growing source of hazard-related damages in the United States, with 9 out of the 10 most expensive wildfires occurring since 2017. Preliminary estimates for LA right now are on the scale of $100 to $170 billion on response and recovery. So the question is, if we are spending billions and billions of dollars during and after a wildfire, how much would it cost if we spent this money up front and in proactive investments in mitigation so that homes and communities are better prepared before a wildfire becomes a disaster? Well, to answer this question, we partnered with IBHS in 2018 and asked the simple question, how much does it cost to build a wildfire-resistant home? And to do this analysis, we took the exterior components of a structure, including the roof, the exterior walls, the decking, and the landscaping, and we broke it apart into individual assemblies. And then we looked at the comparison of a home built with very traditional, very flammable products common throughout the Intermountain West, like in Montana where I live. And we compared that to a very similar structure with the same footprint and size, but swapped out all those building materials with wildfire resistant products. This is for new builds. And so I'll talk you through these estimates right now. And so what we found for the roofing is if you have a roof covering, and assuming that you had an asphalt shingled roof for both that traditional home as well for a new build, then you're looking at improvements such as soffits, eaves, gutter systems, and vents. And you're going to spend about $6,000 on that scale for upgrading that entire roof assembly to meet wildfire resistant standards. However, exterior walls may actually yield a savings. And so this is assuming a wood siding such as cedar gets swapped out with a non-combustible product such as fiber cement. And if you do that, then you'll actually save around $12,000 in those cost estimates. Similarly, with a decking surface, you're going to replace that wood deck, such as oak or pine, and replace it with a plastic composite wildfire resistant covering. And this is going to cost around $2,000 for that replacement. And then when you're looking at landscaping, this is quite simple. It's instead of using bark mulch, which is very, very flammable in a large surface area surrounding a home, you're going to replace it with a non-combustible surface, and that would be either pea, gravel, or rock. And if you do this, you're going to spend about $2,500. So when you account for this as an aggregation, as a whole full systems approach for a structural new build wildfire resistant home, you actually save yourself $2,000. And very importantly, many of these mitigation improvements, many of these risk reduction strategies for wildfire resistance provide mutual benefits for other hazard resiliency efforts, as well as things like durability and long-term maintenance. So this is for new builds that meet Chapter 7A standards in California or ICC WUI standards or other building code compliance for wildfire resistance. What then would it cost to address retrofits and the enormous amount of existing homes already located in wildfire prone areas? So to answer this question, we upgraded the study in 2022. We broke apart the eaves and the gutters as well as the windows and doors, and we looked at these assemblies and these components of the structure with respect to the three primary sources of ignition that you heard my colleague Ann talk about. And that is embers, primarily embers, as well as radiant heat and direct flame. And so when you look at these various assemblages with respect to retrofit improvements and structural hardening efforts, you can see that the costs, although they vary depending on site-specific conditions, are very affordable for some of the most effective mitigation strategies. And so let's look at embers for one, being one of your good scenarios. A lot of building products with simple modification can address those ember vulnerabilities, which do account for 90% of home loss during a wildfire. As you heard Ann and Michelle talk about, these are these critical intersections, these vulnerabilities where often a horizontal and a vertical surface area meet. They allow that potential for embers to accumulate there and then can ignite one of those sidings. So when you look at those mitigation measures, they can be achieved around $5,000. And this is stuff like vertical flashing or some or non-combustible siding that might address that vulnerability. And I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail here shortly. When you're looking at better retrofit scenarios, this addresses all three holistically, including radiant heat and direct flame. This is looking at things like that fencing connectivity between different properties, that near home combustible zone, like the mulch, the decking surface, the windows. A lot of what is included within the better and the good range is on the estimate of $5,000 to $30,000. This can be achieved through the Wildfire Prepared Home and the Wildfire Prepared Home Plus models. The premium products, the cherry products that really reach optimum wildfire resistance, known as the best strategies, is really when you're looking at the whole scale overhaul of a house for retrofitting for wildfire resistant. This is something like using a metal roof instead of an asphalt roof, using a metal structural decking surface or a concrete decking surface instead of a basic plastic composite. So these, again, are the premium products really addressing that radiant heat direct threat from homes that are closely adjacent to one another. But I would, again, emphasize that many of the cost-effective mitigation strategies can be done quite affordably by homeowners over the weekend, and that's what I'll be talking about here in a little bit. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So the good to better wildfire resistant measures. These are things like clearing your gutters and your valley floor and your valleys on your roof line of that debris, that vegetation, the pine needles, anything that can accumulate there and serve as fuel when embers land on it. Those are mitigation measures that many homeowners can just do on their own that doesn't necessarily require any cost at all. If you do want to look at metal flashing to prevent that accumulation potential, then that might cost around $2,000. If you're looking at replacing that first 6 to 12 inches of vertical siding where either the foundation or the decking meets that exterior wall, then that might cost another $2,000 or so. When you aggregate all of this, you're looking at around $5,000 up to $30,000. But this really achieves that wildfire resistance for retrofitting an existing structure, hitting embers as well as radiant heat and direct flame in really effective and affordable ways, including your fencing and your combustible zone around the home, and then very importantly, that maintained vegetation and the defensible space around the property itself. Again, when you're looking at the best wildfire resistant measures, the optimum standards, cherry picking the best of the best products that are fully non-combustible, and depending on the housing footprint, the quantity and the size and scale of the structure itself, you're looking at around $30,000 to $60,000 or plus. But again, this would require the entire overhaul of the roofing surface, perhaps all 4 exterior walls. Very often this level of work for retrofit is not going to be required. But it's worth noting that, again, they provide all these other mutual benefits for hazard resiliency that can really dovetail and tag team with wildfire resiliency for long-term benefits of both durability and maintenance. As I keep noting, many of these effective risk reduction strategies are very easy and affordable. Things like addressing those vulnerable intersections, clearing combustible materials and fuels that might be on top of your roof, on top of your deck, underneath the deck, or within that near home combustible zone. Maintaining the property and the vegetation, the fuel continuity on the property itself, and very closely what is happening with your neighbor's lot. All of these are very, very effective in reducing the initial vulnerabilities from embers. And then, as you heard Anne say, once those homes do start burning, it can really prevent the fuel spread through direct flame and radiant heat as well. We do know that by spending this money upfront, it will yield long-term savings. And in fact, for every dollar we spend right now on proactive mitigation will yield $4 back in long-term benefits, primarily in the form of recovery and rebuilding efforts. And this does not mean that we have to live in concrete bunkers to achieve wildfire-resistant measures. It means using the best available materials, engineering, and science to survive a wildfire. We can and we must do better. These are the homes of the future that we all must be striving for. And collectively, on behalf of all of the panelists that you heard from today, we do have a call of action, and that is to adopt a wildfire building code if you do not yet have one in place. Respond and address to those existing retrofitting needs for all those homes already located in high-risk areas. Invest in safe and effective response, deploy and conduct effective and strategic forest management practices, and very importantly, engage with the public to increase awareness about the increasing risks of wildfire. As our takeaway, we do know that we will have to learn to live with increasing wildfire, but that does not mean that we have to live with wildfire disasters. As we all have this role to play in the cultural shift that is needed to understand that a more resilient future is going to be part of our reality. We do not need to be silent bystanders. History will repeat itself unless we take decisive action now so that all of us are better prepared for the wildfires of tomorrow. Thank you so much, Leslie. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Kimmy and Michelle, Juliana, and Anne for this incredibly balanced and well-rounded, informative, and thought-provoking presentation. This is just something that everyone who is focused on wildfire risk as a family member, or a stakeholder, this is information that they need to have, and we're very grateful to you for taking the time to present it again today. We want to also thank NFPA for their leadership in making this possible. And now we're looking forward to coming together for our live chat.